Welcome back, everyone. So today we're going to discuss factoring quadratics. And a quadratic expression is just a polynomial of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And in order to factor this polynomial of this form, we need to find two binomials x plus n and x plus m, such that when we take the product of them, we wind up with our beginning quadratic expression of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, there are two things that we need to know, that I want you to notice about our factored form. Whatever we get as our factored form, the x plus the n and the m, the product must be equal to c, and the sum of n and m must be equal to b in our quadratic expression. So for example, we have the quadratic x squared minus 7x plus 12. The first thing that I want you to do is I want you to label what your a, b, and c is. In this case, the a is the coefficient of our x squared term. So a in this case is going to be 1. Our b is going to be negative 7. So when you're writing what your constant is for b, you must take into account the operation as well. Now for c, same thing. We must take into account what our constant is, but we must also take into account what the operation is. So here, c is positive 12. Now, in order to factor this quadratic expression, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the factors of c. So in this case, our c is 12. So we're going to write the factors of 12. So we have 1 and 12. We have 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And now, notice that in this table that I've created, we have 6 rows. So I've put all of the positive factor pairs in the first 3 rows. Now, remember, whenever we need a positive number, we can take a positive, multiply by another positive number, or we can take a negative times a negative. So in the bottom 3 rows, what we're going to do is we're going to take the negative of the magnitudes of the first 3 rows. So I'm going to have negative 1 and negative 12, negative 2 and negative 6, and negative 3 and negative 4. And so all of these factor pairs will give me a product of 12. Now, I need to look at, remember, we want the product to be equal to c. So our products equal 12, but we also need to consider the sum of these factor pairs and make sure that we get a sum of negative 7. So we need to look at the factor pairs that we have and choose the one whose sum will give us negative 7. So the sum of the first one will give us 13. The sum of the second will give us 8. This will give us 7, negative 13, negative 8, and negative 7. So in this case, because we want b to be a sum that equals negative 7, we want to choose the factor pair of negative 3 and negative 4. And in order to write our the product of our binomials, we're going to write the x, and we're going to substitute in our factor pair that we chose. So here it's going to be x minus 3. And our next binomial will be x minus 4. And this is the factored form of the quadratic x squared minus 7x plus 12. Now notice, if we wanted to check ourselves to make sure that we got the correct factored form, we can use our distribution to multiply these two binomials out. So we can take x times x minus 4 minus 3 times x minus 4, and if we distribute, we get x squared minus 4x minus 3x, and negative 3 times negative 4 gives me a positive 12, and so we see that we get x squared minus 7x plus 12, and so we know that we are correct. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So this time I'm not going to use the table. We have the quadratic expression x squared minus x minus 6. So remember, the first thing we do is we look at the factors of c. In this case, our c is -6. Okay, and our b is -1. In all of the problems that we're going to look at today, our a will be 1. We will get into quadratic expressions where the a is greater than 1, but that will be in our next lesson. Okay, so here our c is -6, so we want to find a factor pair that gives us a product of -6 and a sum of -1. So if I list the factors of -6, I get 1 and 6, 2 and 3, but I know that one of these needs to be negative. So I'm gonna make the first term of the factor pair negative, and then I also have 1 and -6 and make the other term negative. So now we must choose one of these pairs that's going to give us a sum of -1. Well, the sum of -1 plus 6 gives me 5. The sum of -2 plus 3 gives me 1. The sum of 1 plus -6 gives me -5. And the sum of 2 plus -3 gives me -1. So I want to choose the last factor pair, which is 2 and -3. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my two binomials, bring back my parentheses, and I'm going to insert my factor pair that I chose. So I have +2 and -3. And remember, because we have the commutative property of multiplication, I can also write this as x minus 3 times x plus 2. It does not matter which order you write your terms in, but you must make sure that your signs of the factor pair are correct in the order that you write it in. Okay, and now finally let's look at an example of a word problem. So we have the length of a rectangular porch is x plus 7 feet, and the area of this porch is x squared plus 9x plus 14 square feet, and we want to find the width of the rectangular porch. So we have this porch that's rectangular, and we know that the length is x plus 7 feet, and we know that the area is x squared plus 9x plus 14 square feet. Okay, and so remember, the area for a rectangle is length times width. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this formula and we're going to substitute in. So we have the area is x squared plus 9x plus 14. And we know the length is x plus 7. And we want to find our width of this rectangular porch that has the specific area. So looking at this, we know that one of our factors of our quadratic is going to be x plus 7, and we need to find the other factor. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the factors of 14, which is 1 and 14, 2 and 7, and we also have -1, -14, and -2 and -7. And we need a sum of 9. So of course we're going to pick the 2 and the 7. And after you practice doing these, you won't have to list the factors. You will start to see some of them by a process what we call guess and check. Okay, so here we know that our factor pair is 2 and 7, so we know that we need to insert the 2 here because we already have the factor of 7. Okay, and so our width is x plus 2 feet. Okay, and that is the end of today's lesson.